convince, convince, convince. So, let's talk about the word convince. The part of speech for convince is a verb, which means it shows an action or a state of being. In common usage, to convince someone means to make them believe in something or to persuade them to do something. For example, she convinced me to try the new restaurant here. She was able to make you believe that the restaurant is good and worth trying. You can also use it in negative form, like I couldn't convince him to go, which means you tried but were unable to persuade him. One special note about its usage is that when you're using convince with a person as the subject and an action or activity as the object, you often need a verb of manner, such as by, with, or using, to show how they convinced them. For example, the salesperson convinced me to buy the car by offering a discount. In a formal setting, such as a job interview, you might say, I'm confident that I can convince the hiring manager of my qualifications and passion for the role. This sentence demonstrates how to use the word convince in a professional context where persuasion is key. On the other hand, in casual conversation with a friend who's struggling to decide on a weekend activity, you might say, I'll try to convince Alex to go to that new coffee shop instead of the movie theater. This sentence showcases how the word convince can be used in everyday interactions where social influence is at play. In an academic or business setting, such as when presenting research findings, you might say, our data suggests that we can convince a significant portion of customers to switch to our brand by highlighting the unique features of our product. This sentence illustrates how to use the word convince in a context where persuasion is tied to demonstrating evidence and building a business case. So you're trying to figure out what to convince means. Okay, imagine you want to get someone to agree with your opinion or point of view, but they might be unsure or skeptical at first. To convince them would mean showing them strong reasons or evidence that make them think, hey, I see why this person thinks that way, and it actually makes sense. It's like building a strong argument or case in their minds. Main characteristics are showing proof or logic to support your claim, being confident but respectful in your approach, and making the other person see things from your perspective. If you're not sure what word to use instead, think of synonyms like persuade, win over, or make a point. They all mean similar things. When used, convincing someone might be as simple as having a calm discussion, sharing relevant facts, or even just showing them how something works. The goal is to make the other person understand and agree with your viewpoint, not to force it on them. Depress, depress, depress. Let's talk about the word depress. As a language teacher, I'd be happy to break it down for you. So, the part of speech for depress is a verb, which means it's an action word that shows what someone or something is doing. In common usage, people often use depress to describe a feeling of sadness, hopelessness, or disappointment. For example, you might say, the news about my favorite team not making the playoffs really depressed me. It's worth noting that this word can be easily confused with depress, as in to push something down or put pressure on it, but the emotional connotation is what we're focusing on here. What I want to highlight is that while this verb form of depress is common in everyday conversation, it's also essential to understand its nuances and context to avoid misunderstandings or unintended offense, so keep that in mind when using it in your language interactions. In a formal context, such as a news article or academic paper, You might say, the prolonged drought conditions are depressing agricultural production in the region. This sentence uses the word depress to mean to cause something. In this case, agricultural production to be lower or decreased. The tone is neutral and informative. In a casual conversation with a friend who's feeling down, you might say, watching that sad movie really depresses me every time I see it. Here, the word depress has a stronger emotional connotation, implying that something, in this case, watching the movie, makes someone feel unhappy or sad. The tone is informal and sympathetic. In a business context, such as a quarterly earnings report, you might say, the company's decision to cut costs is depressing profits in the short term, but it will improve efficiency long term. In this example, the word depress is used to mean to cause something. In this case, profits to be lower or decreased. The tone is professional and analytical. So you want to learn about a feeling that lots of people experience from time to time. It's a state where you feel really unhappy and sad for a long period, often making it hard to enjoy things you normally like to do. The main characteristic is this feeling of sadness that can make everyday life feel heavy or weighed down. Some people might call similar concepts as being blue or having the blues. But technically, these feelings are usually shorter and more situational. A better synonym would be a low mood, which can last for weeks or even months. People with this feeling often struggle to find motivation, energy, or interest in activities they used to enjoy, making it hard to get out of bed or put themselves together. Does that make sense? Encounter. 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 So, when it comes to the word encounter, let's start with the part of speech. It's a verb, which means it's an action that you're performing. Now, in common usage, encounter typically refers to meeting or coming face to face with something or someone unexpected, often with some kind of outcome or consequence. For example, I encountered a lot of traffic on my way to work this morning. Or, she encountered a bear while hiking in the woods. What's interesting is that encounter can also be used to describe a situation where two people or groups have a meeting or interaction, often with some kind of conflict or disagreement. For instance, the two countries had a long-standing encounter over border disputes, which shows how the word can take on a slightly more formal or diplomatic tone. One special note about the usage is that encounter can also imply a sense of confrontation or challenge. So it's not always used in a neutral way, it often carries some kind of emotional connotation, whether positive or negative. In a formal setting, you might say, during my diplomatic visit to the Middle East, I had the unfortunate encounter with a group of protesters who were peacefully demonstrating against our country's foreign policy. In this context, using encounter emphasizes the surprise and unexpected nature of the situation. On the other hand, in a casual conversation, someone might exclaim, "I'm so glad I finally encountered that new coffee shop downtown. Their cold brew is amazing." Here, encounter implies running into something pleasant or exciting by chance. In a business or academic setting, you could say, our team's encounter with the unexpected software glitch led us to re-evaluate our project timeline and adjust accordingly. In this scenario, using encounter highlights the unplanned event that had significant consequences for the project's progress. So you want to know what encounter means? Don't worry if it sounds tricky. Essentially, an encounter is when two people or things meet each other by chance or happen to be in the same place at the same time. It's like running into a friend on the street or meeting someone new for the first time. The main characteristic of an encounter is that it's not planned or expected, it just happens. Similar concepts might include meeting or happening upon. And in some cases, people also use words like run in or collision to describe a more informal or even awkward type of encounter. As for how it's used, you might say something like, I had an interesting encounter with a stranger who spoke perfect English. It's a way of describing a chance meeting that turned out to be more than just a quick hello.